What happens when a man blinded by his own success decides his wife is no longer good enough? Thomas Vance was the king of his world, the celebrated CEO of a tech empire he built from scratch. His wife Amelia was his quiet shadow, the woman who had stood by him since the beginning. But in his eyes, she was a relic of a past he wanted to erase. So he did the unthinkable at the most prestigious tech gala of the year, in front of friends, rivals, and the media. He publicly cast her aside for a younger, flashier model. He thought he was closing a chapter. He had no idea he was about to lose the entire book, because the quiet, unassuming family he had just discarded held a secret that would bring his kingdom crashing down around him. Thomas Vance lived a life plated in chrome and glass. His penthouse apartment overlooked the sprawling, glittering expanse of downtown Seattle, a city he felt he had conquered. Below, in a sleek high-rise that bore his company's logo, Innovate Dynamics, hundreds of employees worked to manifest his vision. He was 38 with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen and an ego polished to a blinding sheen. He had clawed his way up from a middle-class background, fueled by ramen noodles, sleepless nights, and a ferocious ambition that left little room for sentimentality. His wife, Amelia Hayes, was the living embodiment of that sentimentality. They had met in college back when his company was just a mess of wires and code in a damp garage, and his diet consisted of whatever was on sale at the corner store. She was an art history major, with a quiet smile and eyes that saw the brilliant, driven man beneath the threadbare sweater. She had believed in him, supported him, and even used her modest inheritance, a few $1,000s from her grandmother, to buy him his first server bank. For 15 years, she had been his anchor. She managed their home with an effortless grace, remembered the birthdays of his key employees, and could soothe his temper with a soft touch and a knowing look. She was the calm in his storm, the bedrock beneath his towering ambition. But anchors, Thomas had recently decided, were for holding you in place, and he wanted to fly higher. The cracks had started small, a dismissive wave of his hand when she'd mention her volunteer work at the local library. A cutting remark about the simple, elegant dress she chose for a black tie event. Amelia, he'd sighed, adjusting his own custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. This isn't a faculty dinner. You look sweet. I need you to look powerful. Amelia had simply smiled, a flicker of hurt in her eyes that he chose to ignore. I'm not a power accessory, Thomas. I'm your wife. His new friends, a slick cohort of venture capitalists and socialites, didn't understand Amelia. They saw a plain, quiet woman who preferred a good book to a noisy nightclub. They saw her as a mismatch for the dynamic, ruthless Thomas Vance they admired. And their whispers, quiet at first, began to echo Thomas's own internal monologue. The catalyst for his final cruel decision was Isabel Croft. Isabel was everything Amelia was not. She was a fiery, ambitious public relations specialist with a network of contacts as vast as her wardrobe. Her laughter was loud, her opinions were sharp, and her presence at his side made him feel like the man he believed he had become, invincible, modern, and utterly unencumbered by the past. He began seeing Isabel discreetly, then less so. He convinced himself it wasn't just an affair. It was an upgrade. It was a strategic business move for his personal brand. Amelia was a comfortable, well-worn sweater. Isabel was a suit of armor. The final conversation with Amelia was chilling in its brevity. He found her in the sunroom, tending to an orchid he'd forgotten he'd given her years ago. "We need to talk," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. She didn't turn around, just continued to mist the plant's leaves. "I know, Thomas. It's not working anymore, Amelia. We've grown apart. I've grown, and you haven't." The cruelty of the words hung in the air between them. "I want a divorce." She finally turned her face pale, but her expression composed. There were no tears, only a profound, weary sadness. "I see. After all this time, all we built—" "I built it," he corrected her instantly. "I built all of this. You were just here." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. At that moment, Amelia Hayes looked at the man she had loved, the boy she had supported, and saw only a stranger. A king in a chrome palace, admiring his own reflection, oblivious to the fact that the foundations were made of sand. "You'll get a generous settlement, of course," he continued, mistaking her silence for acquiescence. "You'll be comfortable. I just need you to be gone. Quietly." Amelia straightened up, the watering can still in her hand. A flicker of something steely, something he'd never seen before, entered her eyes. "Quietly." She repeated the word, a soft, dangerous whisper. "I don't think you get to decide how I handle my humiliation, Thomas. But don't worry. I'll be gone." He felt a brief, unfamiliar prickle of unease, but dismissed it as he walked away. He was Thomas Vance. He was in control. What could she possibly do? She was just Amelia, the librarian's daughter, from a quiet, boring family in Oregon. He had already forgotten the name of her brother, a quiet, bookish type he'd met once or twice at holidays. Evan Eric. It didn't matter. None of them mattered anymore. He was ascending, and it was time to cut away the dead weight. The Innovate Forward Gala was the jewel in Thomas's corporate crown. Held annually at the Chihuly Garden and Glass Museum. It was a spectacular fusion of art and technology, a testament to his company's success and his own personal brand. This year was to be the biggest yet. They were on the cusp of launching Nexus, a revolutionary AI integration platform that promised to make Innovate Dynamics a titan on the level of Google or Microsoft. The entire tech world was watching. For Thomas, it was the perfect stage. He wanted to rip the Band-Aid off, to make a statement so bold and unequivocal that there would be no messy aftermath, no lingering whispers. He would excise Amelia from his life in a single surgical cut and present his future Isabel to the world. It was brutal, but in his mind it was efficient. Amelia received the formal invitation, a thick card of embossed black linen, 2 weeks after their conversation. A small handwritten note from Thomas's personal assistant was tucked inside. "Mr. Vance requests your attendance. He feels it is important for a final public show of unity." It was a summons, not an invitation, a final command to the woman he was discarding. She stared at it for a long time, then a slow, resolute calm settled over her. She would go. But she would not go as a victim. On the night of the gala, Thomas was electric. He stood near the entrance, a glass of champagne in hand, with Isabel Croft clinging to his arm. She was a vision in a glittering, backless silver gown, her laughter echoing off the vibrant glass sculptures. Thomas soaked in the admiration, the flash of cameras, the deferential greetings from industry rivals. This was his world. This was where he belonged. Then Amelia arrived. A hush fell over the immediate area, a ripple of confusion spreading through the crowd. She wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. Thomas had expected her to slip in quietly, find a corner table, and perform her role as the soon-to-be ex-wife with quiet dignity. But Amelia made an entrance. She wore a simple, sleeveless gown of the deepest sapphire blue. It wasn't flashy or revealing, but the fabric flowed around her like liquid midnight, and the color made her calm, intelligent eyes burn with an inner fire. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing a graceful neck, adorned with a single stunning diamond pendant, a piece Thomas had never seen before. She didn't look broken or defeated. She looked serene, poised, and utterly, unshakably composed. She walked in alone, her head held high, and the whispers that followed her were not of pity but of intrigue. Thomas felt a surge of irrational anger. This was his night. She was ruining the script. He strode towards her. Isabel, a step behind her, smile tightening. "Amelia," he said, his voice a low growl. "What is this?" "That's quite an entrance." "You asked me to come," she replied, her voice even. "I came." She glanced at Isabel, her gaze not hostile, but coolly appraising. "Isabel, you look well." Before Isabel could muster a reply, Thomas took control. He stepped onto the small stage near the center of the main hall, tapping a microphone to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent. This was it. The moment he had planned. "Friends, colleagues, partners," he began, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the future of Innovate Dynamics. A future of bold moves, of shedding the old to embrace the new." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He looked directly at Amelia, who stood motionless in the crowd, her expression unreadable. "In business as in life, we must sometimes make difficult, unsentimental decisions to ensure continued growth. We must be willing to divest from assets that no longer serve our forward momentum." His eyes were cold, turning his wife into a line item on a balance sheet. "And so on this night of new beginnings, I want to be transparent with you all. Amelia and I are ending our marriage." A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to divorce. It was another to announce it like a corporate restructuring at your own company gala. It was monstrous. Thomas pressed on the power of the moment intoxicating him. "I wish her well, of course. But my future and the future of Innovate Dynamics requires a different kind of partnership." He reached down and pulled a stunned but thrilled Isabel onto the stage with him. "A partnership that looks forward, not back." He raised his glass. "To the future." The silence was deafening. No one clapped. The attendees, CEOs, investors, journalists, stared, their expressions a mixture of shock, disgust, and morbid fascination. They were witnessing a public execution. Thomas's smile faltered for a second. He hadn't expected this stunned silence. He had expected applause for his boldness. Then from the center of the crowd, a single person began to clap. Slowly, deliberately. It was Amelia. She clapped not with anger or sarcasm, but with a strange, detached finality. Her eyes locked on his, and for the first time that night, he saw a flicker of something that looked like pity. She clapped 3 times, the sound echoing in the mortified silence. Then she turned her sapphire dress, swirling around her, and walked out of the gala, out of the museum, and out of his life. As the doors closed behind her, the spell broke. The room erupted in a furious buzz of whispers. Thomas stood on the stage, Isabel's hand in his, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. He felt powerful, liberated, and utterly in control. He had done it. He had publicly severed the tie to his past. He was free. He was so high on his own perceived victory that he failed to notice the man in the corner watching the entire exchange on his phone. A man who then put the phone to his ear and spoke 2 quiet words. "It's done." The week following the gala was for Thomas a victory lap. He and Isabel were the talk of the town. The gossip columns were ablaze, some condemning his cruelty, but others the ones he cared about, painting him as a decisive alpha visionary, unafraid to make the tough choices. He and Isabel were photographed at exclusive restaurants, their laughter loud and carefree. He had successfully rebranded his life. Amelia, true to her word, was gone. She didn't return to the penthouse. Her lawyer, a man whose name Thomas didn't recognize from any of the city's top firms, sent a curt email stating that Ms. Hayes would be handling all affairs through counsel and had no desire for personal contact. The divorce proceedings were initiated with unnerving speed and efficiency. Thomas instructed his own high-powered legal team to be generous, a final act of performative magnanimity. "Give her whatever she wants," he'd said. "It's a small price to pay for freedom." But while his personal life felt streamlined and upgraded, strange currents were beginning to stir at Innovate Dynamics. The launch of Nexus, which should have been his crowning achievement, was hitting unexpected turbulence. A key chip supplier suddenly invoked a force majeure clause and tripled their prices, citing unforeseen supply chain issues. A rival tech firm, one Hitinsum he had always considered second-rate, launched a surprisingly similar product a week early, undercutting his market entry. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was an irritating and costly setback. Then came the financial whispers. Thomas had been seeking a final round of capital investment to fund the global rollout of Nexus, a sum in the neighborhood of $500 million. It should have been easy. His company was a unicorn, a golden child of the tech world. Yet two major venture capital firms that had been courting him for months suddenly grew cold. Their top partners were suddenly unavailable for meetings. His CFO, a perpetually nervous man named Robert Smith, came into his office, his face ashen. "There's a problem, Thomas," Robert said, clutching a tablet. "A significant block of our publicly traded shares is being bought up, quietly, through multiple shell corporations." Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, unconcerned. "Corporate raiders smelling blood? Let them try. Our fundamentals are strong. It's just market jitters over the Nexus launch." "I don't think so." Robert pressed his finger, tracing a complex web of transactions on the screen. "This is different. It's methodical, precise, and incredibly well-funded. They're not just buying, they're strategically acquiring influence. And I've traced the primary purchasing vehicle back to an investment firm I've never heard of, North Star Holdings." Thomas scoffed. "North Star sounds like a backwater mutual fund. Find out who they are and buy them off." But North Star Holdings was a ghost. They had no public-facing partners, no flashy website, no media presence. They were a black hole of capital, their origins, shrouded in impenetrable layers of private equity law. Over the next 2 weeks, North Star's acquisitions accelerated. They weren't just buying shares. They were buying his company's debt from lenders and poaching key engineers with offers so ludicrously high that even Thomas couldn't match them. Panic and emotion. Thomas Vance hadn't felt since his garage days began to creep in. He was losing control. It felt like his company, his magnificent chrome and glass ship, was being boarded by pirates who were silent, invisible, and everywhere at once. Meanwhile, Amelia was rebuilding her life far from the glare of Seattle. She had retreated to her family's home in a quiet, wealthy enclave near Portland, Oregon. It wasn't a palace, but a sprawling, elegant craftsman-style house set on acres of old-growth forest, overlooking the Willamette River. The Hayes family valued privacy above all else. They were to the outside world simply a comfortably retired couple. Her father, a former literature professor, and her mother, a landscape architect. But that was a carefully constructed facade. Amelia's father, William Hayes, hadn't just taught literature. He had used the proceeds from his grandfather's timber empire to become one of the most astute and discreet private investors on the West Coast. He didn't chase trends, he built legacies. He owned vast tracts of land, held controlling interests in quiet, unglamorous, but massively profitable industries, and ran his family's wealth with the quiet precision of a chess grandmaster. He despised the new money arrogance of men like Thomas Vance. The night of the gala, Amelia had called her brother, Ethan, from the car. "He did it," she'd said, her voice shaking but not breaking. "I saw." Ethan's voice was calm but with a hard, cold edge. "The plan is in motion. Dad has given the green light. North Star is a go." Ethan Hayes was the one Thomas had dismissed as Evan or Eric, the quiet, bookish one. Thomas would have been shocked to learn that Ethan, who had a PhD in computational economics from MIT, was the architect and manager of the Hayes family's vast investment portfolio. He was a prodigy who preferred the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly balanced algorithm to the roar of a boardroom. But his sister's public humiliation had ignited a cold fury within him. For the past year, at Amelia's pained but hesitant request to keep an eye on Thomas's finances, Ethan had been analyzing Innovate Dynamics. He saw what Thomas's ego blinded him to. The company was over-leveraged, dangerously dependent on the singular success of Nexus, and vulnerable to a hostile takeover. Thomas had built a beautiful skyscraper, but Ethan had discovered it was sitting on a fault line. And now, with the full, silent weight of the Hayes family fortune behind him, Ethan was triggering the earthquake. He was the ghost in the machine, the architect of Thomas's unraveling. And Thomas, consumed by his new life with Isabel and his own hubris, had no idea that the quiet, boring family he had cast aside was now holding the strings of his entire empire. He was fighting a war, and didn't even know his enemy's name. The email arrived on a Monday morning. It was from the board of directors, a group Thomas had personally selected and until now completely controlled. The subject line was stark: urgent and mandatory, emergency board meeting. Thomas read the body of the message, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. The meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. the next day. The agenda to discuss the recent significant shift in controlling interest of Innovate Dynamics and to vote on the future leadership of the company. Future leadership. The words felt like a slap in the face. He immediately called Marcus Thorne, his lead board member, and a man he'd considered a friend. "Marcus, what the hell is this? Who is North Star Holdings?" Marcus's voice was strained, distant. "Thomas, they have us. They've acquired over 51% of the voting shares. They did it so quietly, so fast. It's a masterclass in corporate raiding. They have a controlling interest. They called the meeting. My hands are tied." "Whose side are you on?" Thomas roared. "I'm on the side of the shareholders, Thomas, and right now North Star Holdings is the shareholder. I'm sorry. Just come to the meeting tomorrow." The line went dead. Thomas spent the rest of the day in a frantic, desperate haze. He called his lawyers, his brokers, his bankers. The answer was the same everywhere he turned. It was over. He had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. North Star Holdings had executed a flawless, bloodless coup. He was the king of a country that had already sworn allegiance to a new, unknown ruler. Isabel, sensing the shift in his fortunes, became distant. The carefree laughter was replaced by worried questions about their finances. "This will all blow over, right, Jay?" she asked, her eyes searching for an assurance he could no longer give. "Our trip to Monaco is still on for next month." He saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes and realized with a sickening lurch that she was just another asset, and her value was depreciating along with his stock price. That night he didn't sleep. He paced the floor of his penthouse, the glittering city lights below, now seeming to mock him. He played the events of the last few months over and over in his mind. The chip supplier, the rival's launch, the cold shoulders from the VCs. It hadn't been random bad luck. It had been a coordinated attack. Someone was trying to destroy him. But who? Who had this kind of money, this kind of sophistication, and this kind of hatred for him? He ran through his list of rivals. None of them had the resources or the subtlety for an operation of this scale. He arrived at the Innovate Dynamics headquarters the next morning, looking haggard, his bespoke suit feeling like a costume. The usual deference from his employees was gone, replaced by nervous glances and hushed whispers. He felt like a stranger in the empire he had built. The boardroom on the 50th floor was his sanctuary. It had a single massive table of polished obsidian and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. It was a throne room. But today, he was not the king. The board members were already seated, their faces grim. Marcus Thorne wouldn't meet his eye. At the head of the table, in the seat Thomas always occupied, sat a severe-looking man in his 60s, whom Thomas had never seen before. "Mr. Vance, thank you for joining us," the man said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "I am Alistair Finch, legal counsel for North Star Holdings. We can begin." The meeting was a formality, a brutal piece of corporate theatre. Finch laid out the situation in cold, legalistic terms. North Star Holdings now owned 51.7% of the company. In accordance with the company's bylaws, they were exercising their right to restructure leadership effective immediately. The board has been presented with a motion to remove Thomas Vance from his position as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board, Finch stated, looking around the table. All those in favor. Every single hand went up. Even Marcus Thorne's. A wave of dizziness and nausea washed over Thomas. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, it felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. "The motion carries," Finch said flatly. "Mr. Vance, your employment with Innovate Dynamics is terminated. Security will escort you from the building to collect your personal effects." Thomas stared speechless. His company, his life's work was gone in the space of 5 minutes. His mind was a maelstrom of rage and confusion. "Who?" He finally managed to rasp, his voice hoarse. "Who is North Star? Who is behind this?" Alistair Finch allowed himself the slightest, cruelest hint of a smile. "North Star believes in a hands-on approach to its investments. They have already appointed a new CEO to guide Innovate Dynamics into its next chapter. He has an unparalleled understanding of the company's technology, its market position, and its vulnerabilities." Thomas's mind raced. Who could it be? A rival CEO he had poached talent from. A disgruntled former executive he had fired. "The new CEO is here," Finch said, gesturing towards the large double doors of the boardroom. "He is ready to take his seat." The doors swung open. Thomas Vance turned his head, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and furious anticipation. He was ready to face his destroyer. But the man who walked in was not a face he recognized from Forbes magazine or the Wall Street Journal. It was a face he had seen only a handful of times at awkward Thanksgiving dinners and one tedious wedding anniversary. A face he had dismissed as utterly insignificant. It was Amelia's brother, the quiet, bookish one, Ethan Hayes. Time seemed to slow down, to thicken like honey. The sounds of the boardroom, the shuffling of papers, the distant city traffic faded into a dull, roaring hum in Thomas's ears. He stared at the man walking towards the head of the table, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Ethan Hayes looked different from the handful of times Thomas had met him. Gone was the slightly awkward academic slouch and the ill-fitting blazer. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet generational wealth, not the flashy branding of new money. His movements were calm and deliberate. He carried an understated leather portfolio under his arm, and his eyes, the same intelligent, deep-set eyes as his sister's, held a look of cool, dispassionate assessment. He didn't look triumphant or vindictive. He looked like he was arriving for a job he was eminently qualified to do. He walked to the head of the table and placed his portfolio down. He gave a slight formal nod to Alistair Finch, and then looked around at the board members who straightened in their chairs, their attention absolute. Finally, his gaze fell on Thomas. "Thomas," he said, and the simple use of his first name was more devastating than any insult. It was the sound of a superior addressing a subordinate. "I'm sure this is a surprise." The connection hit Thomas like a physical blow, an explosion of understanding so violent it knocked the air from his lungs. North Star Holdings, the quiet, unassuming family from Oregon. Amelia's sudden, unnerving composure. The diamond pendant he had never seen before. The efficient, unknown lawyer. It all coalesced into a single, horrifying truth. He hadn't just divorced a simple librarian's daughter. He had publicly, cruelly, and arrogantly humiliated the beloved sister of an unimaginably wealthy and powerful family. He hadn't cut away dead weight. He had severed the artery that was keeping him alive, and they had simply waited for him to bleed out. He thought of Amelia's father, the folksy retired professor. He remembered shaking his hand, a soft academic grip, and feeling a smug sense of superiority. He had mistaken immense quiet power for weakness. He had looked at a lion and seen a house cat. "You," Thomas whispered the word, barely audible. His face had gone from red with rage to a ghostly white. "It was you." Ethan's expression didn't change. "My family does not appreciate public spectacles, especially when a member of our family is made the centerpiece." He gestured vaguely towards the panoramic window. "You built an impressive company, Thomas. Your technology is brilliant, but your foundation is rotten. You over-leveraged against future profits, you made enemies, and you surrounded yourself with sycophants. You valued perception over substance. That made you a target." He paused, letting the clinical assessment sink in. "My sister believed in you. She saw substance where it seems there was only ambition. When you cast her aside, you cast aside the only person who was genuinely invested in your success, not just your company's stock price. The loyalty you commanded was transactional. Ours is not." Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Thomas's world. He looked around the room at the board members, his friends. They were all looking at Ethan with a mixture of fear and respect. They had already shifted their allegiance. He was utterly, completely alone. The arrogance that had defined his entire adult life shattered into a million pieces. The charisma, the confidence, the sense of invincibility, it all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, terrified man. He saw his future in a sickening flash, the loss of his company, his wealth, his status, the departure of Isabel, the mockery of the very people he had sought to impress. The pity looks, the headlines, tech CEO ousted in hostile takeover. Thomas Vance loses it all. His heart began to pound against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The edges of his vision started to go dark. The air in the climate-controlled room felt thin, unbreathable. He tried to speak, to rage, to say something that would wound this calm, quiet man who had so effortlessly dismantled his entire existence. But no words came, only a strangled gasp. He reached out a hand, grabbing the back of a chair to steady himself, but his legs gave way. A collective gasp went through the room as Thomas Vance, the titan of tech, the master of his universe, crumpled to the floor. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed in a heap on the plush corporate carpet, his meticulously crafted world finally and completely falling into darkness. The last thing he was aware of was the calm, controlled voice of Ethan Hayes saying, "Someone call security and get a medic. It seems Mr. Vance is unwell." Thomas awoke to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile antiseptic smell of a hospital. For a blissful, disoriented moment, he didn't know where he was or what had happened. Then memory returned, not as a flood, but as a series of brutal cinematic flashes. Ethan Hayes walking into the boardroom, the hands of the board members rising against him, the floor rushing up to meet him. A groan of pure agony escaped his lips. It wasn't just a headache. It was the pain of a soul that had been flayed. A nurse bustled in. "Ah, you're awake, Mr. Vance. You gave us all a scare. You had a severe panic attack leading to a vasovagal syncope. Basically, the shock made you faint. The doctor will be in to see you shortly." He was alone. There was no Isabel wringing her hands by his bedside, no concerned calls from his board members. His phone lying on the side table was dark and silent. He picked it up and saw why. A dozen missed calls and texts from his lawyer and his publicist, but nothing from anyone he had considered a friend. The top news alert on his screen was a headline from the Wall Street Journal: "Innovate Dynamics shakes up leadership founder. Thomas Vance ousted Ethan Hayes, appointed as new CEO." The article was clinical and devastating. It painted a picture of a seamless transition. It quoted board member Marcus Thorne, who praised Hayes as a visionary leader with a deep understanding of both technology and stable financial strategy. There was a single sentence about Thomas: "The board thanks Mr. Vance for his initial contributions and wishes him well in his future endeavors." It was a corporate obituary. He had been erased. When he was discharged the next day, the world he returned to was no longer his. His corporate accounts were frozen. His access to the Innovate Dynamics building was revoked. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Frank, who Thomas had shared a joke with just last week, looked at him with pity and told him his personal effects from his office would be couriered to him. Isabel was waiting for him at the penthouse, her bags already packed. There were no tears, no dramatic confrontation. Her departure was as transactional as their entire relationship had been. "I'm so sorry, Thomas, I really am," she said, avoiding his gaze. "But it's just too much. My brand is associated with success. I can't be tied to this kind of collapse." "So that's it?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Was it all just about the success?" She had the decency to look momentarily ashamed. "We had fun, didn't we? It was a great ride. But I have to look out for myself. You of all people should understand that." She kissed him on the cheek, a cold, dry gesture, and walked out of his life, leaving behind only the faint scent of her expensive perfume. In the weeks that followed, Thomas's downfall was absolute. He was forced to sell his penthouse to cover legal fees and the debts he had personally guaranteed. He moved into a small, generic rented apartment that felt like a prison cell. The friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Meanwhile, Ethan Hayes was transforming Innovate Dynamics. There were no grand pronouncements or flashy media appearances. He worked with a quiet, relentless efficiency. He renegotiated the company's debt from a position of strength. He smoothed over the supply chain issues with a few quiet phone calls. He scrapped Thomas's expensive vanity projects and refocused the company on its core technology. He earned the respect of the employees, not with charisma, but with competence. He was a builder, not a showman, and the company, freed from Thomas's ego-driven management, began to thrive in a way it never had before. He wasn't just a better CEO, he was a better leader. The most torturous part for Thomas was that Ethan's reign wasn't vindictive. He never spoke ill of Thomas in public. He never leaked damaging stories. His revenge wasn't loud and fiery. It was the quiet, complete success of the empire he had taken. It was the ultimate statement. You were the only thing holding this company back. Desperate, broken, and humbled in a way he never thought possible. Thomas did the one thing he had sworn he never would. He tried to contact Amelia. He sent her an email, a long, rambling, pathetic plea for, he wasn't even sure what. Forgiveness. An explanation. He poured out his regret, his shock, his loneliness. The reply came not from Amelia, but from her lawyer. It was one sentence long. Hayes has moved on and considers all matters between you to be concluded. We ask that you refrain from any further contact. The words were a final steel door slamming shut. She had moved on. The quiet, simple woman he had deemed unworthy of his future had a life that no longer included him even as a memory. The loud silence of her absence was the final damning verdict on the man he had been. He was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own making, haunted by the ghost of a good woman and the quiet, brilliant brother who had defended her honor by taking everything he had ever valued. 2 years passed. 2 years of grinding, humbling obscurity. Thomas Vance, the man who once graced the covers of tech magazines, was now a consultant for a small, struggling startup in a nondescript office park in the suburbs. The work was tedious. The pay was a fraction of what he once made in a day. But it was honest. The collapse had burned away his arrogance, leaving behind a scarred but more thoughtful man. He had lost everything, and in the process had been forced to find a part of himself he didn't know existed, a person who could exist without applause. He learned to cook his own meals, to take the bus, to find satisfaction in solving a small coding problem instead of closing a multi-million-dollar deal. The silence he had once dreaded became a space for reflection. He finally understood the depth of his cruelty, the monumental folly of his pride. He realized he hadn't just lost a company. He had lost his moral compass long before that. The divorce gala wasn't the beginning of his fall. It was the symptom of a sickness that had been growing in him for years. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was walking through a public park when he saw her. Amelia. She was standing by a newly dedicated children's reading garden, a project funded by a local philanthropic foundation. She looked luminous. She wore a simple camel-colored coat, and her hair was shorter, framing a face that was more confident and serene than he had ever seen it. She was laughing, talking with a group of city officials. He saw her name on a bronze plaque, the Hayes Family Reading Garden, in honor of a lifelong love for books. He watched from a distance as she interacted with people. There was an ease, a warmth, a genuine grace to her that he had always taken for granted and had eventually mistaken for weakness. He saw it clearly now. Her strength had never been loud. It was quiet, deep, and resilient, like the roots of the old oak trees shading the garden. He saw a man approach her and hand her a coffee. It was Ethan. He looked relaxed out of the corporate world, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans. They stood side by side, a comfortable familial silence between them, watching children run through the garden their family had built. They weren't just wealthy. They were purposeful. They were using their power to create, to nurture, to give back. It was a different kind of wealth, one that couldn't be measured in stock prices or penthouse views. Thomas felt a profound, aching sense of loss, but it was no longer tangled with bitterness or a desire for revenge. It was a clean, sharp grief for the man he could have been, for the life he could have had if he hadn't been so blinded by shiny things. He knew with absolute certainty that even if he had all his money and power back, he could never earn his way back to the world she inhabited. He had a choice. He could walk over, try to speak to her, to offer a clumsy, inadequate apology. But he knew it would be a selfish act, one meant to soothe his own conscience, not hers. It would be a disruption of her peace, a peace she had clearly fought for, and won. And so for the first time in his life, Thomas Vance made a truly unselfish decision. He stayed hidden behind the trees. He watched his past for a few moments longer, a beautiful, untouchable tableau of a life he had thrown away. Then he turned and walked away. A solitary figure disappearing into the afternoon crowd, leaving Amelia Hayes to the bright, peaceful future she so richly deserved. He hadn't gotten his old life back, but in that moment of quiet retreat, he may have finally reclaimed a small piece of his soul. Thomas's new life was a quiet litany of routines. The 7:15 a.m. bus, the lukewarm coffee from the office machine, the 8 hours spent untangling buggy code for a company that made inventory management software. The work was unglamorous, but it was tangible. It was a world of problems and solutions, of clear syntax and logical flaws. It was, in its own way, a comfort. The ghosts of his past had receded, leaving not peace, but a quiet, manageable emptiness. He no longer craved the roar of the crowd, having learned the profound hollowness of its applause. It was during a late Tuesday night, while running a diagnostic on a client's network security, that he first saw the flicker. A digital ghost, a piece of malware so sophisticated, so elegant in its malevolence that it was almost beautiful. It wasn't designed to steal or ransom data. It was a sleeper agent designed to map a system's deepest architecture and wait. He traced its signature falling down a rabbit hole of encrypted servers and dark web forums. It was a digital breadcrumb trail, and at the end of it, he found a name that sent a chill down his spine: Axiom Global. Axiom was run by Damian Stryker, a man who made the old Thomas Vance look like a philanthropist. Stryker was a predator who didn't engage in takeovers. He preferred corporate evisceration. He would identify a competitor, shatter their core technology from the inside out, and then buy up the smoldering wreckage for pennies on the dollar. Thomas kept digging, his old obsessive instincts kicking in. He realized the malware he'd found was just a probe, a reconnaissance mission. But the digital fingerprint, the specific algorithmic structure, was a match for a security protocol he himself had designed years ago for Innovate Dynamics. It was an old back-end system access point for the Nexus platform, a vulnerability only its original architect would know how to exploit. Axiom wasn't just sniffing around. They were sharpening a spear aimed directly at the heart of his old company. They were planning to corrupt the Nexus platform from within, triggering a cascading failure that would not just damage Innovate Dynamics, but destroy its credibility forever. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. A bitter, ironic satisfaction bubbled up first. It would be justice, wouldn't it? For Ethan Hayes, the brilliant strategist, to be blindsided by a true shark-like striker. For the company that had been stolen from him to be turned to ash. The old Thomas would have leaned back in his chair, poured a glass of whiskey, and watched the world burn. But the old Thomas was gone. All he felt now was a sickening dread. He thought of the thousands of employees, of the genuinely revolutionary technology they had all worked so hard to build. He had laid the foundation, and Ethan had built a stronger house upon it. The thought of a vulture-like striker tearing it all down felt like a desecration. It was his legacy, even if his name was no longer on the door. His pride was no longer in the ownership, but in the creation itself. He was trapped. What could he do? If he went to the media, he'd be dismissed as a bitter, disgraced founder crying sour grapes. If he tried to contact Innovate Dynamics officially, he'd be blocked by lawyers and corporate firewalls. No one would believe him. He was a ghost, a non-entity. He spent the next 48 hours without sleep, fueled by caffeine and a cold, rising panic. He compiled everything. He had the malware signature, the traced path back to Axiom's known servers, a detailed schematic of the attack vector, and the specific vulnerability in the Nexus code. He had a warning that could save the company a message in a bottle and no one to give it to. He looked at the encrypted file on his screen, a Cassandra's prophecy that no one would hear, let alone believe. His past had finally caught up with him, not with a demand for vengeance, but with a test of his newfound soul. Thomas knew he couldn't approach the fortress of Innovate Dynamics through the front gate. So he went around the back. He remembered a young, fiercely intelligent cybersecurity engineer he had personally hired years ago, a woman named Maya Singh. She was brilliant paranoid and respected data above all else. He found her encrypted professional contact on a secure network and sent the data packet, no name, no explanation, just a subject line, Urgent Nexus Vulnerability. Check Legacy Protocol 7G. You are being hunted by Axiom. Inside Innovate Dynamics, the message was received like a bomb threat. It was immediately flagged and escalated. The initial consensus among the senior security staff was to dismiss it as a prank or an elaborate phishing attempt. But Maya Singh, now the head of the department, recognized the specificity of Legacy Protocol 7G. It was an obscure corner of the architecture. Thomas had built a piece of code so fundamental that no one had thought to revise it. She ran the diagnostic. Her face went pale. The anonymous source was right. A sophisticated infiltration was already in progress, silently mapping their systems for a full-scale assault. They were days, perhaps hours away from a complete catastrophe. Ethan Hayes was in a board meeting when Maya burst in a breach of protocol he had never witnessed. She laid out the situation in stark, terrifying detail. The attack was real, and the warning had come from an anonymous ghost who knew their systems as well as their founder. The realization dawned on Ethan slowly then all at once. The intimacy of the knowledge. The strategic foresight. There was only one person on the planet with the ability and the motive, or perhaps the lack of motive, to send such a warning. It had to be Thomas. Pride warred with pragmatism in Ethan's mind. His every instinct was to handle it himself, to prove that his company didn't need its disgraced founder. But this enemy Axiom Global was a different beast. Ethan was a brilliant builder and strategist. But Thomas had been a street fighter. He knew how to think like a predator, because he had been one. Swallowing his pride, Ethan made the most difficult decision of his tenure as CEO. He picked up his phone and found a number he never thought he would dial. They met in a small, empty cafe, halfway between Thomas's shabby apartment and the glittering Innovate Tower. It was a neutral ground, a no-man's land between their two worlds. Thomas saw Ethan walk in, and for the first time, he saw the man not as a conqueror, but as a leader burdened by immense responsibility. "The data you sent," Ethan began, foregoing any greeting. "It was accurate. We're vulnerable. Thank you." Thomas just nodded, stirring his black coffee. "Stryker doesn't leave survivors. I didn't want to see him turn our work into a crater." "Our work," Ethan repeated, acknowledging the shared ownership in that single phrase. Why Thomas after everything? Thomas looked out the window at the rain-streaked street. "I spent 2 years thinking about everything I lost," he said, his voice quiet and raspy. "My company, my money, my wife. But the thing I truly lost was the ability to be proud of the man I saw in the mirror. Helping you, helping the company. It wasn't about you. It was about me. It was the one thing I could do that the old me never would have." In that moment, Ethan saw the truth of it. This wasn't a ploy. It was an act of penance. "Stryker will expect a conventional defense," Ethan said, his mind shifting into strategic mode. "He'll anticipate us patching the vulnerability. We need to do more. We need to set a trap." "A honeypot," Thomas said, his eyes lighting up with the old familiar fire of strategic battle. "Feed his malware corrupted data. Make him think he's succeeding while we wall off the core systems and trace his attack back to the source. We can gut him, expose him to the SEC." For the next hour, they weren't victorious and vanquished. They were two brilliant minds united against a common enemy. Thomas's intimate, almost instinctual knowledge of the system's weaknesses, combined with Ethan's cool, methodical logic, formed a strategy that was both elegant and lethal. They saved Innovate Dynamics. The counterattack was a masterpiece. Axiom Global was exposed. Their stock plummeted, and Damian Stryker found himself under federal investigation. Ethan never publicly acknowledged Thomas's role, but the whispers in the tech world were deafening. A week later, a courier delivered a simple envelope to Thomas's apartment. Inside was a cashier's check for a substantial amount, with a simple unsigned note, "Consulting fee." It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't an invitation back into their world. It was a respectful acknowledgement of a debt paid. It was enough. Thomas didn't see Amelia again, but one day he received a letter from her lawyer. It was a formal notice that the charitable foundation established by the Hayes family was endowing a new wing of the public library, the very one where Amelia used to volunteer. The wing was to be named the Vance Center for Digital Literacy, funded by an anonymous donation made in his honor. It was her final word, a quiet, graceful acknowledgement that she now remembered not the monster he had become, but the brilliant, driven man she had first loved. Thomas stood in his small apartment, holding the letter, and for the first time in a long time he felt no anger, no regret, only a profound, quiet sense of peace. He hadn't won his kingdom back, but he had at last found his honor. Thomas Vance's story is a stark reminder that the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. He measured his life in stock prices and public acclaim, and in doing so he tragically misjudged the true value of the people around him. He saw his wife's quiet strength as a weakness, and her family's humility as insignificance, a mistake that cost him everything. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a reckoning, a story of how karma wielded by a quiet, brilliant brother can be both swift and devastatingly precise. It reminds us that true power isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's the silent, deep-rooted strength that you never see coming. If this story of poetic justice and painful lessons resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story of consequence and redemption. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas that explore the complexities of human nature. What do you think Thomas deserved in the end? Did he get what was coming to him, or was his downfall too severe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The pristine white sheets of the hospital bed were a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the messy, agonizing reality of her life tearing apart. One moment Isabella was pushing through the searing pain of premature labor, her heart screaming for her husband, Alejandro. The next he was there. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, radiating a cold, polished glamour, was the one woman Isabella had prayed was just a figment of her paranoid, pregnant imagination. And as her world crumbled, a single devastating question hung in the air, a question that would be answered by a DNA test, a test that would either validate her deepest love or confirm her darkest betrayal, changing everything forever. Isabella's life was by all external measures a modern-day fairy tale. She lived in a sprawling glass-walled mansion nestled in the most exclusive enclave of the city, a home that boasted panoramic views and an infinity pool that bled into the horizon. Her wardrobe was a curated collection of runway couture, her social calendar a whirlwind of philanthropic galas and exclusive art openings. And at the center of it all was Alejandro Morales, her husband. Alejandro was a titan of industry, a self-made millionaire who had built a tech empire from the ground up. He was devastatingly handsome, with eyes the color of dark honey, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and melt Isabella's heart in equal measure. They had met 5 years ago at a charity auction, a chance encounter that felt like kismet. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that left her breathless, showering her with affection, respect, and a love so profound it felt like the safest harbor in the world. Their marriage had been passionate, a true partnership. He valued her opinion on everything from business acquisitions to the thread count of their linens. She, in turn, was his confidant, his sanctuary from the cutthroat world he navigated. When she told him she was pregnant 9 months ago, he had wept with joy, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around in their sun-drenched living room, promising their child a life of boundless love and opportunity. For the first 6 months of her pregnancy, that promise held true. Alejandro was attentive doting. He'd rush home from the office for her doctor's appointments, massage her swollen feet for hours, and talk to her growing belly, telling his unborn child stories of the adventures they would have. Isabella had never felt more cherished, more certain of her happiness. But then a subtle shift occurred, a change in the atmosphere as imperceptible as a barometric drop before a storm. It started with the late nights. Closing a big deal, mi amor, he'd murmur, his voice weary over the phone. Then came the weekend trips, sudden and non-negotiable. Investor meetings in Singapore, he'd explain, his kiss a fleeting brush against her cheek as he left. The distance wasn't just physical. The easy intimacy they shared began to fray at the edges. He grew guarded with his phone, angling it away from her, when a text message lit up the screen. The shared laughter that once filled their cavernous home became a rare echo. Isabella, hormonal and increasingly anxious, tried to dismiss her fears. This was the pressure of his work, she told herself. He was building a legacy for their child. To doubt him felt like a betrayal in itself. Yet the gnawing unease persisted. She started noticing a new scent on his suits, a faint floral perfume that was decidedly not hers. She saw a credit card statement with a charge for a lavish dinner at a restaurant they had never been to together. When she gently questioned him, he became defensive, his voice taking on a hard edge she'd never heard before. "Are you questioning my loyalty?" Isabella. After everything he'd asked, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and hurt that made her instantly retreat, apologizing for her insecurity. The name Sophia Reyes first entered her consciousness as a whisper on the society pages. A rising starlet, an actress with smoldering eyes and a reputation for being as ambitious as she was beautiful. Alejandro's company had recently signed a major endorsement deal with her. "She's the new face of our brand," he'd explained dismissively when Isabella saw a picture of them together at a press event, his arm firmly around Sophia's waist. They looked for all the world like a couple. Isabella spent the final weeks of her pregnancy in a state of quiet torment, her days a hollow performance of the happy, expectant mother. She decorated the nursery in shades of cream and soft blue. Her hands assembling a crib, she prayed her husband would one day stand beside, with love not duty. She smiled at the baby showers her friends threw, accepting gifts with a gratitude that felt like a lie. Every night she lay in their king-sized bed, the space beside her feeling more like a chasm, and prayed that the birth of their child would be the miracle that would bring her Alejandro back to her. She didn't know that the birth would indeed bring a revelation, but it would be far from the miracle she was hoping for. It would be the beginning of the end. The first pang of pain was sharp and sudden, a fierce clenching deep in her abdomen that stole her breath. Isabella gasped, her hand flying to her belly. It was 2 weeks before her due date. It was too soon. She tried to breathe through it, telling herself it was just another Braxton Hicks contraction, another false alarm. But then another came stronger this time, a relentless wave that brought her to her knees on the cold marble floor of the foyer. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the pain. This was real. This was happening. Her first instinct was to call Alejandro. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. His name at the top of her recent calls. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable. Please leave a message. Alejandro." "It's me," she choked out, her voice a ragged whisper between contractions. "The baby. It's coming. I'm going to the hospital. Please, please meet me there. I need you." She tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. The automated voice was a cold, indifferent sentinel guarding the man who had promised to move mountains for her. Despair warred with the urgency of the moment. With a surge of adrenaline, she called her driver, her voice miraculously steady as she gave him the address. The Clínica Universidad de Navarra in Madrid. The private hospital Alejandro had insisted upon, renowned for its state-of-the-art maternity ward and its discretion for high-profile clients. The drive through the city was a blur of traffic lights and horns, each sound amplifying the frantic rhythm of her heart. The contractions were coming faster now, a merciless tide pulling her under. The hospital staff was waiting alerted by her call. They whisked her into a private birthing suite, a room that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility with soft lighting and sweeping city views. But its opulence only made her feel more alone. Nurses with kind, professional faces hooked her up to monitors their soothing words, a distant buzz against the roar of her fear. Where was he? Hours bled into one another. Each contraction was a mountain she had to climb alone. She clutched the cool metal of the bed rail, her knuckles white, her body screaming for relief, her heart screaming for her husband. The nurses offered sympathetic glances. "Have we managed to reach your husband, Mrs. Morales?" one asked gently. Isabella could only shake her head, the shame and fear a toxic cocktail in her throat. And then, just as she felt she was losing her grip, the door to her suite swung open. For a heart-stopping second, relief flooded her. He was here. Alejandro stood in the doorway, his tailored suit slightly disheveled, his hair looking like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. But the relief curdled into ice-cold shock. He was not alone. Standing just behind him, her hand possessively resting on his arm, was Sofia Reyes. The actress was a vision of cruel perfection. She wore a figure-hugging crimson dress that seemed to mock the sterile white of the hospital. Her makeup was flawless, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in a perfect wave. She surveyed the room with an air of bored amusement. Her eyes, when they finally landed on Isabella in the bed, held a glint of undisguised triumph. It was the look of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. The beeping of the fetal heart monitor seemed to grow louder, a frantic, rhythmic testament to the chaos that had just stormed into the room. Isabella stared at Sofia's hand on her husband's arm, at the unapologetic way Alejandro stood there, bringing his mistress to the birth of his child. The pain of her contractions was nothing compared to the agony that ripped through her heart. The storm had not just arrived. It had made landfall directly in the center of her soul. The air in the birthing suite grew thick, heavy with unspoken betrayals and the sterile scent of antiseptic. For a long moment, the only sound was the frantic, steady beep of the monitor, tracking her baby's heartbeat, a stark counterpoint to Isabella's own, which felt as if it had shattered into a million silent pieces. Alejandro. Isabella's voice was a fragile thread of sound, barely audible over the hum of the machines. He finally moved, detaching himself from Sofia's grasp, as if suddenly remembering where he was. He took a hesitant step forward, his handsome face a mask of conflicting emotions, guilt, frustration, and a flicker of something she couldn't name. "Isabella, I came as soon as I got your message. You brought her." Isabella's gaze flickered to Sofia, who was now examining her perfectly manicured nails with a deliberate, insulting nonchalance. "Isabella, now is not the time," Alejandro said, his voice low, urgent. He was trying to manage the situation, to control the narrative, just as he did in his boardrooms. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was the precipice of Isabella's world. Not the time. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat, raw and painful. "You bring your mistress Sofia Reyes, the woman whose perfume clings to your clothes to the birth of our child, and you tell me it's not the time." Another contraction seized her, a vice of pure agony. She cried out, arching her back, the physical pain a welcome distraction from the emotional torment. A nurse rushed to her side, offering her a hand to squeeze. Isabella gripped it, her eyes never leaving Alejandro's. Sofia finally spoke, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. He was with me when you called, at a very important dinner. I simply insisted on coming along to offer my support." She smiled, a small, cruel curve of her lips. "We wouldn't want you to be alone at a time like this." The audacity of it was breathtaking. "My support." Isabella repeated, her voice shaking with rage. "You have been trying to destroy my marriage for months. You are not welcome here. Get out. I'm afraid that's up to Alejandro, isn't it?" Sophia's gaze shifted to him, a silent challenge. "Tell her, darling." Alejandro looked trapped, a lion caught in a snare of his own making. "Sophia, maybe you should wait outside," he said, his voice lacking any real conviction. "No," Sophia said firmly, stepping forward. She was claiming her territory. "I'm staying. Isabella needs to face reality. Our relationship isn't some sordid little affair. It's real. And frankly, after all the stress you've put him under with your condition, he needs me here." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Her condition, her pregnancy, the most sacred journey of her life reduced to an inconvenience, a burden. "How dare you?" She whispered, the words filled with a venom she didn't know she possessed. "This is my child. Our child." She looked pointedly at Alejandro, her eyes begging him to say something to defend her, to defend their family. "And we need to be sure of that, don't we?" Sophia added quietly, the words dropping into the tense silence, like stones into a still pond. Isabella's head snapped towards her. "What did you just say?" Alejandro finally seemed to find his voice a harsh, defensive tone. "That's enough, Sophia." But the poison had been administered. The seed of doubt, expertly planted by a master manipulator, had found fertile ground in the fractured trust between husband and wife. Isabella stared at Alejandro, searching his face for denial, for outrage at Sophia's insinuation. Instead, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his dark, honey eyes. That flicker was the final fatal blow. He was actually considering it. He was doubting her fidelity. He was doubting their child. A wave of nausea and despair washed over her, so powerful it eclipsed the physical pain. This was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Her husband, the man she loved more than life itself, stood before her, with his mistress on the verge of questioning the legitimacy of the baby she was currently fighting to bring into the world. The white walls of the luxurious suite began to close in the beeping of the monitor, sounding like a death knell for the life she once knew. In that moment, Isabella understood that she was not just in labor with her child. She was in the process of giving birth to a new horrifying reality. The battle of childbirth was primal and all-consuming. In the hours that followed the confrontation, the world outside of Isabella's body ceased to exist. The sharp words, the betrayal, the chilling presence of Sophia Reyes. It all faded into a distant roar, subsumed by the singular monumental task of bringing her son into the world. Alejandro remained a silent, brooding figure in the corner of the room, while Sophia, to Isabella's fury, had been permitted to wait in the private lounge adjoining the suite. Her presence was a toxic energy that seeped under the door. At 3:17 in the morning, after a final heroic push that tore a scream from Isabella's raw throat, her son was born. He was perfect. A mess of dark hair, a tiny, scrunched-up face, and a cry that was startlingly robust. When the nurse laid him on her chest, warm and slick against her skin, a wave of love so fierce, so absolute, washed over Isabella, cleansing her of everything else. This tiny, helpless being was hers. He was the one pure, untainted thing in her shattered world. She looked at his face, tracing the delicate line of his brow, his miniature nose. She saw Alejandro in him. It was unmistakable in the curve of his lips and the shape of his eyes, which were still sealed shut against the harsh, new light of the world. Tears of exhaustion, relief, and a profound, aching love streamed down her face. She named him Mateo. The door opened, and Alejandro approached the bed, his earlier defensiveness replaced by a look of stunned awe. He stared at the small bundle in Isabella's arms, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, Isabella's heart dared to hope. Perhaps, seeing his son, his own flesh and blood, would shatter the spell Sophia had cast over him. He's beautiful, Isabella. Alejandro, whispered his voice thick with emotion. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers brushing against Mateo's soft cheek. But the moment was shattered almost as soon as it began. Sophia appeared in the doorway. Her arms crossed her expression, a careful blend of feigned warmth and clinical assessment. "Congratulations," she said, her voice dripping with insincere sweetness. "He is small." She walked closer, her gaze fixed on the baby. "It's remarkable, isn't it? How babies can look like anyone." She let the comment hang in the air before turning her perfectly painted smile on Alejandro. "Darling, now that the hard part is over, perhaps it's time to clear the air, for everyone's peace of mind." Alejandro flinched but didn't contradict her. The poison was still at work. Isabella clutched Mateo closer, a primal protective instinct flaring within her. "There is nothing to clear up," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Oh, I think there is," Sophia countered smoothly. "A man like Alejandro needs certainty. He's building an empire, a legacy. The question of succession of lineage. It's not a trivial matter. A simple test would resolve everything. It would be a gift, really, to all of us." Isabella looked at Alejandro, her eyes pleading with him. "Don't do this, Alejandro. Don't do this to us. To him." He wouldn't meet her gaze. He looked from Mateo's innocent face to Sophia's calculating one, his own a canvas of torment. The pressure from Sophia, coupled with his own wounded pride and the seeds of doubt she had so expertly sown, was too much. He was a man accustomed to data, to facts, to mitigating risk, and in his compromised state, that's what this had become, a risk to be managed. "It's just a formality, Isabella," he said, finally his voice devoid of emotion. "To silence any questions. We'll use the best lab. My office uses a place for corporate matters, high-level stuff. GeneCorp Diagnostics. They're discreet and foolproof." The name meant nothing to Isabella, but the words foolproof and formality felt like daggers. He had already made the decision. He had chosen doubt over faith, accusation over love. A nurse, looking deeply uncomfortable, entered with the necessary kit. A simple buccal swab from the inside of Mateo's cheek and one from Alejandro. The procedure was quick, sterile, and clinical. As the nurse gently swabbed her newborn son's mouth, Isabella felt a profound and bitter coldness seep into her bones. Her son's welcome into the world was not a celebration of love, but an evidence-gathering exercise. His very identity was being questioned before he had even been alive for an hour, all because his father had brought a viper into their lives. The results, Alejandro informed her, would be expedited. They would have the truth in 24 hours. For Isabella, it felt like a death sentence. The next 24 hours were the longest of Isabella's life. She refused to let Matteo leave her sight, holding him, feeding him, memorizing every detail of his perfect face, as if she were branding the image of him onto her soul. Alejandro had retreated, booking a separate room in the hospital at Sofia's insistence. He sent flowers, a massive, ostentatious bouquet of white lilies that filled the room with a funereal scent. Isabella had the nurses remove them immediately. She existed in a state of suspended animation, a bubble of maternal love, surrounded by a sea of dread. Every time the door opened, her heart leaped into her throat. Nurses came and went, checking on her, and the baby, their professional smiles doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. They all knew. The hospital staff whispered in the hallways. The story of the millionaire, his laboring wife, and the famous actress was the kind of drama that spread like wildfire. Isabella felt their pity, their judgment, and it was suffocating. Late the next afternoon, Alejandro appeared at her door. Alone this time. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. In his hand he held a sleek tablet. "The results are in," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. He didn't approach the bed, but stood near the door, as if creating a safe distance between them. Isabella's breath hitched. She tightened her hold on Matteo, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Alejandro, Gene Corp just sent the encrypted report to my secure server," he said, his fingers tapping on the screen. He brought up a document, a clinical-looking page filled with genetic markers and technical jargon, but at the bottom, highlighted in a stark red box, was the conclusion. He turned the tablet towards her. She didn't need to read the complex data. The 2 words at the bottom were all that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. The world tilted on its axis, the beeping of the monitors, the distant city sounds, her own breathing. It all faded into a deafening silence. 0%. The number was an absurdity, a statistical impossibility, a lie so profound it defied comprehension. "No," she whispered. It was the only word she could form. "No, that's not possible. It's a mistake." Alejandro let out a harsh, broken sound that was almost a laugh. "A mistake. Isabella. Gene Corp Diagnostics has a perfect record. They are the best in the world. The science doesn't lie." He looked at her then, and the conflict that had been warring in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a chilling certainty, a look of utter betrayal and revulsion. All this time, he said, his voice thick with a pain so deep it was terrifying. "Our entire marriage. Was it all a lie? Who was he, Isabella? Who was the man you were sleeping with behind my back?" There was no one, she cried, her voice cracking. "Alejandro, you are his father. I have never been with anyone but you. Look at him. He looks just like you. I don't see it." He shot back his face, a cold, hard mask. "I see a stranger. I see your betrayal." Suddenly the door swung open, and Sophia swept in, a dark angel arriving for the final act. She went straight to Alejandro's side, placing a comforting hand on his back. "I'm so sorry, darling," she murmured, though her eyes, when they met, Isabella's, were alight with malicious triumph. "I knew something was wrong. I could feel your pain. She was the architect of this destruction, and now she was playing the part of the savior." "There's been a mistake, Isabella," repeated her voice, rising with hysteria. "The lab, someone made a mistake. Or you did this," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Sophia. "This is your doing." Sophia feigned a wounded look. "Isabella, I know you're emotional, but this paranoia is not helping. You've been caught in a lie, and you're lashing out. It's understandable. She turned to Alejandro. She's not well, my love. We need to get you away from this toxicity. Alejandro looked at Isabella, at the woman he had once loved, now hysterical in a hospital bed, clutching a child he believed wasn't his. And he made his choice. My lawyers will be in contact with you, he said, his voice as cold and final as a tombstone. They will arrange for a settlement on the condition that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. You will not use my name. The child is not my responsibility. You are on your own. He turned and walked away, Sophia clinging to his arm, whispering soothingly to him. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut, plunging the room into a deafening silence. Isabella stared at the closed door, her mind struggling to process the cataclysmic event that had just occurred. She had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her name, her future. They had taken it all. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He was all she had left. A new feeling began to smolder beneath the shock and grief. It was a slow burning ember of rage. They had called her a Lyra. They had called her son a stranger. They had built a lie on top of a betrayal and used it to destroy her. No, she whispered, not to the empty room, but to her son. I will not disappear. I will fight. I will prove who you are, Matteo. I swear it. The first deception had been fired. The war had just begun. The eviction was swift and brutal. Less than 48 hours after giving birth, while she was still physically and emotionally shattered, a stern-faced man in a tailored suit, one of Alejandro's lawyers, arrived at the hospital. He presented her with a set of papers and a bank card. Mr. Morales has made an initial deposit of 50,000 euros into this account. The lawyer stated, his voice devoid of any sympathy. It is a gesture of goodwill. In exchange, you will vacate the premises of the Madrid estate by the end of the day. A car will be waiting to take you and the child wherever you wish to go within the city limits. He slid another document across the table. A non-disclosure agreement. Sign this and a more substantial final settlement will be discussed. Refuse and the goodwill deposit is all you will ever receive. Isabella looked at the man at the cold legal document that sought to erase her from Alejandro's life to buy her silence and her son's illegitimacy. The ember of rage within her glowed brighter. She pushed the papers back across the table. Tell Alejandro Morales I will not be silenced, she said, her voice shaking but firm. The lawyer simply raised an eyebrow, collected his papers and left. The message was clear. She had chosen the hard way. Thrown out of the hospital with a newborn and a small bag of borrowed baby supplies. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The gilded cage had vanished, and she was in a free fall. She had no family in Madrid. Her parents lived in a small town in a different country, and had a fragile relationship with Alejandro at best. Her so-called friends were Alejandro's friends, society swans who would flock to power and money, and would undoubtedly believe the salacious narrative Sophia and Alejandro were already spinning. There was only one person she could turn to: Anna. Anna was her childhood friend, a fiery, no-nonsense journalist who had always viewed Isabella's millionaire lifestyle with a healthy dose of skepticism. She lived in a small, cluttered but cozy apartment in the vibrant Malasaña district, a world away from the sterile opulence Isabella had known. When Isabella called, her voice breaking, Anna didn't hesitate. "Give me the address. I'm coming to get you." Seeing Anna's familiar, warm face was the first moment Isabella felt she could truly breathe. Anna took one look at her pale, shell-shocked friend and the tiny infant in her arms, and her expression hardened with protective fury. "That son of a bitch," Anna muttered carefully, taking Matteo from Isabella's arms so she could get in the car. "I never trusted him. Too polished. Too perfect." Anna's apartment was a sanctuary. It smelled of coffee, old books, and life. While Isabella showered, Anna made a makeshift nursery in her spare room. She listened patiently as Isabella recounted the entire horrific ordeal, the months of suspicion, the confrontation in the hospital, Sophia's cruel words, and the devastating DNA test. 0%, Anna said, her journalist's mind immediately kicking into gear. "That's not just a negative result, that's a statistical anomaly. It's almost more likely to get a false positive than a result that absolute. Unless it's true," Isabella whispered, the fear still a raw wound. "No," Anna said firmly, her eyes blazing with conviction. "Unless it was rigged. You said he used a place called Gene Corp Diagnostics." Isabella nodded. "I've heard of them," Anna said, pulling out her laptop. "They're top tier. They handle sensitive corporate espionage cases, high-stakes patent disputes. Their security is supposed to be legendary, which also means their reputation is everything. A proven mistake would ruin them." For days, Isabella focused solely on Matteo, finding a fragile peace in the simple, demanding rhythm of caring for a newborn. But Anna was a dog with a bone. She spent her nights digging, using her journalistic resources and back channels to probe into Gene Corp. "It's a fortress," Anna reported back a week later, frustrated. "Their digital security is airtight. No disgruntled employees speaking out, no whispers of malpractice. They're clean." Isabella's heart sank. "So it's a dead end?" "Not necessarily," Anna said, her eyes gleaming. "If you can't break down the front door, you look for a side window. You said Alejandro's lawyer mentioned they use Gene Corp for corporate matters, right? High-level stuff." Isabella nodded. "So who in Alejandro's corporate world would have the motive and the means to orchestrate something this complex? This isn't just about a jealous mistress wanting to get rid of a wife. Tampering with a Gene Corp result would be incredibly risky and expensive. Sophia might have the motive, but does she have that kind of power? This feels bigger. This feels like a corporate hit aimed directly at Alejandro's heart." Anna's words hung in the air. The idea was terrifying, but it also made a twisted kind of sense. The attack felt too precise, too devastating to be merely a crime of passion. They had targeted his legacy, his heir. "We need proof, Anna. Without it, it's just a crazy conspiracy theory from a bitter, discarded wife." "Then we get proof," Anna declared, her jaw set. "We can't challenge Gene Corp head-on. But we can investigate the chain of custody. The sample was taken at the hospital. It was picked up by a courier. It was delivered to the lab. Every step is a link in the chain, and every chain has a weak link. We just need to find it." It was a sliver of hope, but for Isabella, it was everything. She was no longer just a victim. She was a fighter. Cast out and left with nothing, she and Anna would start their own investigation, a quiet war waged from a small apartment in Malasaña, against a powerful, unseen enemy. They were looking for the truth, one broken link at a time. The first few weeks of the investigation were a series of frustrating dead ends. Anna's official inquiries into the hospital's protocol were met with polite but firm stonewalling, citing patient confidentiality. Alejandro's confidentiality. They refused to release the name of the courier service or the specific technician who handled the samples. It was a wall of institutional silence designed to protect wealthy clients. "They're circling the wagons," Anna said, pacing her small living room, a mess of papers spread across her coffee table. Alejandro's legal team has probably already been in contact, reminding them of the consequences of a privacy breach. Isabella, rocking a fussy Matteo, felt a familiar wave of despair. "So we're stuck." "No." Anna insisted, her eyes alight with a new idea. "We're thinking like journalists trying to get people to talk. We need to think like a spy. The weak link isn't the official channels, it's the people." Anna's new strategy was to focus on the human element. She spent days camped out in the cafe across from the Clínica Universidad de Navarra, observing the flow of medical couriers. She cross-referenced the logos on their uniforms with local company databases. After 3 days of surveillance and 10 cups of coffee, she got a hit, a mid-level company called Biotrans Express. They weren't the biggest or most prestigious, but they handled overflow work for several major hospitals. The next step was to find the driver. Anna, using a plausible cover story about a lost but sentimentally valuable and non-biological package, managed to get a list of drivers who had been on duty the night Matteo was born. One name stood out: Javier. A part-time driver, a university student trying to make extra cash. He was the definition of a weak link. Finding Javier was easy enough. Getting him to talk was harder. Anna and Isabella, with Matteo sleeping in his carrier, cornered him one afternoon on his university campus. He was jumpy, defensive, and denied everything. "I just deliver the packages," he insisted, refusing to make eye contact. "I don't know what's in them. I pick up. I drop off. That's it." But Anna was relentless. "We know there was a special pickup that night. A priority run from the Clinica to Gene Corp Diagnostics. A VIP client. A pickup that was logged under unusual circumstances." She was bluffing, but it was a calculated risk. Javier's composure cracked. He paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but heavy with the weight of her pain. She adjusted the carrier so Javier could see Matteo's sleeping face. That package contained the future of this little boy. It was a lie. And we think you know something about it. The sight of the baby, the raw emotion in Isabella's voice, seemed to break through Javier's fear. He glanced around nervously, then motioned for them to follow him to a more secluded bench. "Look, I needed the money," he confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My tuition was due. I got a call that night, not from my dispatcher, but from a private number. It was a man. He told me to intercept the VIP pickup from the Clinica. He said the original sample was contaminated, and that he had the replacement sample. He told me to make sure the replacement was the one that got delivered to Gene Corp." Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. "A replacement sample. Did you see the man?" Javier shook his head. "No." He directed me to a side street near the hospital. The package was left for me in a lockbox. It looked official, same packaging, same seals. But the original sample, I was supposed to destroy it. He paid me €5,000 just to switch the packages and keep my mouth shut. It was the smoking gun, a confession, a clear act of sabotage. Did he give you a name? Anything? Anna pressed. No name, Javier said. But his voice, it was distinctive, low, gravelly, and he mentioned a name. He said, Rivas will be pleased the matter is handled. The name hung in the air. Rivas. It meant nothing to Isabella. But when she relayed the information to Anna later that night, Anna's eyes went wide. She turned to her laptop and began typing furiously. Ricardo Rivas. Anna breathed, pulling up a series of articles. He's Alejandro's biggest rival. They've been locked in a brutal corporate war for the last 2 years over a new cellular technology patent. Rivas has a reputation for playing dirty. Very dirty. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture far more sinister than Isabella could have imagined. This wasn't just about Sofia Reyes. She was likely a pawn, a beautiful, willing distraction. The real mastermind was Ricardo Rivas. He hadn't just wanted to wound Alejandro in the boardroom. He had orchestrated a strike against him that was deeply, horrifically personal. He had aimed to invalidate Alejandro's legacy, to poison the root of his dynasty, by making him deny his own son. But what about Sofia? Isabella asked. She was there. She was the one who pushed for the test. And who do you think put the idea in her head? Anna countered. Rivas is smart. He wouldn't get his own hands dirty. He would find someone close to Alejandro, someone with their own motives, and use them. Sofia wanted you gone. Rivas wanted Alejandro broken. They had a common enemy. Suddenly, Anna stopped. She was staring at a photo from a society gala taken 6 months prior. In the background, almost lost in the crowd, stood Sofia Reyes. She was in an animated conversation with a silver-haired, imposing man. Anna zoomed in. The man was Ricardo Rivas. It was all the proof they needed to take the next step. They had the driver's confession. They had the motive. They had the connection between the conspirators. They now had the ammunition to go back to Alejandro, not as a spurned wife with a wild theory, but with cold, hard facts. They had a glimmer of hope, and it was blindingly bright. Armed with Javier's confession and the damning connection between Sofia and Ricardo Rivas, Isabella knew she couldn't just walk up to Alejandro. He was walled off, cocooned in his anger, and manipulated by the very people who had orchestrated his pain. She needed a battering ram, and that meant finding a lawyer who was fearless enough to take on a titan like Alejandro Morales. Anna, through her network, found the perfect person. A sharp, formidable attorney named Elena Vargas, a woman known for taking on impossible cases and winning. Elena listened to Isabella's story in her sleek, minimalist office, her expression unreadable. She examined Anna's research, Javier's secretly recorded confession, and the photograph of Sofia with Rivas. When Isabella was finished, Elena leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "This is beautiful," Elena said the words, sending a shiver down Isabella's spine. "It's a symphony of corporate espionage and personal betrayal. They didn't just break the law. They were arrogant about it." Elena's strategy was aggressive. She didn't file a quiet motion. She fired a cannonball. She filed an emergency petition with the family court alleging fraud, conspiracy, and emotional distress. Crucially, she demanded an immediate court-ordered and supervised second DNA test. She attached Javier's affidavit and the evidence linking Sofia to Rivas. She served the papers not just to Alejandro's legal team, but to Alejandro himself. The effect was explosive. Alejandro, who had been trying to bury his pain in work and the empty companionship of Sofia, was blindsided. His lawyers had assured him Isabella would fade away. Instead, she had returned with an army. His first reaction was rage. He called Elena roaring about defamation and harassment. Mr. Morales. Elena's voice was like ice over the phone. Your anger is noted. However, we have a sworn affidavit from the courier who switched the samples on the night your son was born. He did so on the instruction of a man who stated that Rivas will be pleased. We also have evidence placing your current companion, Miss Sofia Reyes, in private conversation with your chief business rival, Ricardo Rivas. If you wish to contest this in open court and have this drama play out on the front page of every newspaper, be my guest. Or you can consent to a simple supervised blood test. The choice is yours. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the threat of a public spectacle that would destroy his company's reputation, Alejandro was cornered. He agreed to the test. The second test was a world away from the first. It took place in a neutral medical facility overseen by a court-appointed supervisor. Elena Vargas was there a stoic guardian. Alejandro was there, his face pale and grim. Isabella was there holding Mateo, her heart, a tangled mess of hope and fear. Sofia was notably absent, having been ordered by Alejandro's frantic lawyers to make herself scarce. The blood draw was quick. The wait for the results was agonizing. They all gathered 2 days later in Elena Vargas's conference room. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife. A court official arrived with a sealed envelope. He opened it and read the single-page report aloud. His voice was flat and official. Based on the analysis of the DNA samples provided, the alleged father, Alejandro Morales, is not excluded as the biological father of the child, Mateo Morales. The probability of paternity is 99.9999%. Silence. The words echoed in the sterile room. 99.9999%. Isabella let out a shuddering sob, burying her face in Mateo's soft blanket. Vindicated. Her son was vindicated. Alejandro stared at the report as if it were written in a foreign language. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled gray. The entire foundation of his rage, his cruelty, his life for the past month had been a lie. A lie he had not only believed, but had championed. He looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time since that horrific night in the hospital. He saw the profound pain in her eyes, the exhaustion, the resilience. And he saw the love she held for the son he had disowned. The weight of his actions crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand going to his chest as if he couldn't breathe. Isabella. He choked out his voice, a raw, broken thing. My God, what have I done? The unmasking was complete. But the truth was a double-edged sword. It had cleared Isabella's name, but it had also unleashed a new kind of chaos. The betrayal was not hers, but his, and the man who had been the architect of it all, Ricardo Rivas, was still out there, while the woman who had acted as his willing accomplice, Sofia Reyes, was about to face a reckoning of her own. Alejandro had his son back, but he had lost his wife, and the journey to even begin to atone for that was a mountain far higher than any he had ever climbed in the world of business. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Armed with the court-verified DNA results and Javier's testimony, Elena Vargas didn't just win. She went on the offensive. She strategically leaked key parts of the story to Anna, who crafted a stunning, explosive piece of investigative journalism that laid the entire conspiracy bare. The story of the corporate titan, the spurned wife, the scheming actress, and the rival who weaponized a baby's paternity became an international sensation. Ricardo Rivas's reputation was shattered. His company's stock plummeted as investors fled from the taint of his dishonorable tactics. He was engulfed in a firestorm of lawsuits and investigations. Sofia Reyes's career evaporated overnight. The endorsement deals vanished. The film roles were rescinded. Branded as a malicious homewrecker and a co-conspirator in a cruel plot against a mother and her newborn, she became a pariah. The public that had once adored her now reviled her. She disappeared from the limelight, her ambition turning to ash in her mouth. But for Isabella, the public victory was a hollow echo compared to the private war still raging in her heart. Alejandro was a man undone. The revelation had not just exposed his gullibility. It had forced him to look at a part of himself he never knew existed. A cruel, vengeful, and weak man, easily manipulated by pride and a beautiful face. He was consumed by a guilt so profound it was a physical illness. He fired his entire legal team. He came to Anna's apartment, not as a millionaire, but as a penitent. He stood at the door, drenched from the rain, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Isabella," he said, his voice raw. "There are no words to excuse what I did. I was a fool, a monster. I let them poison my mind against you, the purest thing in my life. I betrayed you. I betrayed our son." He had transferred the Madrid mansion into her name. He had set up a trust fund for Mateo so vast that it would ensure his future 100 times over. He offered to finance Anna's dream of starting her own independent news agency. He offered Isabella anything she wanted the world if she would just take it. But Isabella was no longer the woman who had lived in the gilded cage. The fire of the past month had burned away her naivete, reforging her into someone stronger, someone who understood that her worth was not tied to a man, a mansion, or a name. She let him see Mateo. She watched as he held his son for the first time with the full, undisputed knowledge that this was his flesh and blood. She saw the tears stream down his face, the profound, gut-wrenching regret in his eyes. A part of her, the part that still loved the man he once was, ached for him. But love was no longer enough. Trust once shattered so completely could not simply be glued back together. Weeks turned into months. Alejandro was relentless in his pursuit of redemption. He attended therapy. He made public apologies. He dedicated his time and resources to charities for single mothers. He sent her letters not of excuse, but of self-reflection, taking full accountability for his every failure. He didn't ask her to come back. He simply asked for the chance to prove he could be the father Mateo deserved, and perhaps one day, a man she could respect again. The story ends not with a kiss, but with a choice. We see Isabella months later, sitting in the sun-drenched garden of the Madrid mansion. Her mansion. She is radiant, confident, a queen on her own throne. Mateo is laughing in his playpen on the grass. Her phone buzzes. It's a message from Alejandro. He is in the city and would like to see Mateo. He makes no demands on her time, simply offering to be a father. Isabella looks at her son, at the beautiful life she has secured for them both. She has been vindicated. She has found her power. The story is no longer about his betrayal, but about her resilience. Whether she will ever let Alejandro back into her heart remains an unanswered question. But for the first time, the choice is entirely hers. She is not a victim of a millionaire's drama, but the architect of her own new life, built from the ashes stronger and more beautiful than before. The journey of Isabella is a testament to the incredible strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. From the depths of unimaginable betrayal to the triumphant reclaiming of her truth, her story reminds us that even when our worlds are set on fire, we can rise from the ashes. But what do you think? Was Alejandro's remorse genuine? Can a trust so completely shattered ever be rebuilt? Or are some betrayals truly unforgivable? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of drama resilience and ultimate justice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with others who love a story where the truth prevails. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next compelling narrative. Thank you for listening.